This is an essay by Gorgeous Moon. Have you ever met a haiku? Open parentheses, question mark, close parentheses. What is a meta haiku? For my purposes, it is a standard haiku, a 17-syllable poem broken into 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5 syllables that has an explicit awareness of itself as a member of the category haiku, in which its conformity to or deviance from the conventions of that categorization carries meaning beyond the content of the poem itself. That's a fancy way of saying it is a 17-syllable poem that takes seconds to read and minutes to explain. Who writes short poems that need long explanations? This girl. Why? Because after years of massively overcompensating for a clusterfuck of trauma, neurodivergence, and closeted queerness, plus a firm belief that the democratization of understanding is essential for a brighter future for us all, I capitulated in the last years and decided to lean into my pathological need to over-explain myself and incorporate it into my artistic process. All of my conceptual art and poems are artifacts of trains of thought and function as prompts for the conversations I need to have to help me understand and explain myself in the context of my experiences and the systems that have precipitated them. I started writing meta haiku in lockdown 1 as a direct response to observing systems, both micro and macro, personal and societal, and what happens to them when exposed to extraordinary stress. Broken haiku. Tem incorporates breakdowns, but spares are getting rare, I know my sis. In this poem, the system into which breakdowns are incorporated is haiku itself, from which a standard iteration would read, I know my system incorporates breakdowns, but spares are getting rare. Despite acknowledging that breakdowns are incorporated, because spares are getting rare, the system is no longer able to repair itself as well as it would under normal conditions. This has caused the system to produce an aberrant iteration in which the syllable place is now set 4 syllables back. This may prompt a number of things to happen. The word system is broken over the end and start of the poem, which may compel the reader to reunify those 2 disparate syllables once they understand their relationship. This may prompt them to read 18 syllables where 17 are printed, or create a loop, very much indicative of my own system under the pressure of lockdown. Before one spiraling thought was finished, the next had already begun. Once these connections are made, the reader is presented with a choice. Should this aberration be dismissed for being faulty in favour of a standard iteration, one that is easier to read, fulfills conventional expectations of how a haiku is to be read, and doesn't simply words over lines break? Should this iteration's aberrative nature be compensated for or tolerated? Should the reader simply start reading 4 syllables back, ignoring the aberrant line breaks, imposing standardization upon the aberration, and acting like system is not broken? Should this aberration be accepted and treated as valid for what it is? A second poem that is equally aware of its falling into this category is this. Can a question mark be syllable? Is hate the pain we feel when forced through a system that is not ours? Question mark. Again, by forcing this sentiment through the syllable line break of haiku, a few things happen. The 5-7-5 line breaks highlight the fact that this poem is only 16 syllables long. There is a syllable of speech missing. In its place is a question mark. Syllable is by definition a verbal category, and yet we have a printed poem. Punctuation is an extra set of information beyond the words themselves to indicate the inflection needed to fully understand true sentiment and meaning. To hear this sentiment, one needs merely to hear 16 syllables, which may be written as individual monosyllabic invocations. As the title already indicates, the formulation of a question is not always dependent on the use of punctuation. Word order is often enough, and yet convention requires us to punctuate. It demands that a 17th printed invocation be added. This beggars the question then, what is a syllable? Or, more importantly, in what context is what a syllable? If a verbal syllable is a single sound or invocation that one may produce to invoke meaning in speech, what is a single printed invocation if not a syllable? We have here a linguistic intersection of spoken language, as would naturally read like this: is hate the pain we feel when forced through a system that is not ours, and written language represented as haiku. Two conventions and one sentiment that is being transliterated from one to the other. By virtue of being broken over the line breaks that it is, the sentiment is now rhythmically pained, as well as conceptually painting the foundational conventions of the form. The standard haiku is evidently not suited to the optimal expression of this sentiment. Nonetheless, we have here a haiku that neither honors our conventional expectations of syllable nor the natural flow of the sentiment. Why? The reader is being forced to answer a question about the system which underpins the conventions upon which standard haiku are built. Standards and conventions allow us a smoother, quicker, more fluent exchange of information. But just as conventions can shape our expectations, standardization can easily become a mode of dismissal or marginalization for idiosyncratic, vernacular, or dialectic usage. It can exclude users not privileged with the necessary conditions to master standard form. Policing deviation from standard language is a mode of classist repression. You can take the girl out of the north, but you can't take north out at girl. This haiku only follows standard form when spoken in a Northern English dialect, which I can only represent on paper by invoking a phonetic alphabet. Standard English would have the sentiment take 20 syllables, broken 5, 8, 7. While I am not advocating for the acknowledgement of punctuation marks as syllables, I am advocating for the questioning and interrogation of our foundational truths and how they inform, form, and affect our perception. I am not asking us to change our concept of syllable, but to entertain a different order of syllable, so as to explore what is lost or gained in transliteration and translation once one crosses from one medium or convention to another. Every medium carries with it its own biases and colourings that may unwittingly censor, obfuscate, or otherwise augment the trueness of a sentiment's expression. This poem is meant to create a hypothetical space in which the reader can experience the setting aside of their expectations, their conventions, their systems for understanding haiku, and entertain another system that they are not accustomed to entertaining. A space in which one can ask oneself, how does it feel to have to entertain two systems simultaneously? How does it feel for something that exists naturally in one system state to be forced through a different system? And what does that do to that something's state? The sentiment of this poem itself is contemplating the nature of hate. Is it something that we can associate with pain? And is pain something we can associate with being forced through systems or expectations that are not suited to us or our needs? The situations in which I feel the urge to express what we commonly call hate almost exclusively come from situations in which I actually need to express pain and/or resentment. The initial prompt for this poem was finding myself saying, I hate Google Docs for automatically imposing standardized capitalization upon my sentences when I refuse to capitalize myself. It forces me to constantly have to do the extra work of manual correction. Do I really hate Google Docs? Or do I resent the extra work I have to do to maintain my individual voice outside of standard convention? It certainly is a pain in the ass. These poems ask to be given worth despite there being aberrations, despite either not fulfilling or precisely because they fulfill a different set of expectations. I'm trans. I am an aberration in the standardized system of heteronormativity which would have us believe that gender is an absolute binary, the deviation from which is to be policed, dismissed, and devalued through acts of word, fist, and law. These are trans poems. Those options I laid out for broken haiku, I choose the last one. Like the poem, I ask not to be dismissed or to be tolerated despite my aberrative nature. I ask to be accepted and appreciated precisely because of who I am and the fact that my aberration embodies space to be beautiful outside of convention and standardized expectation. The pain I feel when forced through a system that is not mine is the pain that I feel when I am forced through other people's systems of expectations. I feel it when I am misgendered. I feel it when I am dead-named. I feel it when I am subjected to transmisogynistic violence. Hate is the resentment I feel when being forced to do the extra work of having to entertain others' systems despite the fact that they are predicated on my systematic devaluation and dehumanization. Force can take the form of verbal assaults. When somebody directs hate speech at me, I experience pain because they are forcing me through a system of demands, expectations, and judgments which deny me the space I need to exist. This in turn forces me to do the extra work of repairing the breakdowns of my already systemically embrittled self-worth. Force can also take the form of physical violence, which, when forced upon my body, causes me to experience the pain that my body then has to go through to make me aware of damage and heal the cells that fall outside of the homogeneous cookie-cutter cutting press of heteronormativity. You may not like these poems. You may hate them, or at least resent them for demanding you do more work than you were expecting from 34 syllables. They are not meant to be liked. They are meant to illustrate the ways in which convention and its language do not comfortably house my transness or my experience of it. If the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, language and convention are tools that I have had to deconstruct and retool that I can wield them in a way that does not hurt me or us. I have to do the work of simultaneously holding the language of oppression and the language of liberation in my mind so as to translate between the two to optimize my expression and minimize my pain. Despite that immediate prompt coming from Google's capitalization, when I wrote "Can a question mark be syllable?", I had just written my trans manifesto, titled "I fucking hate men." And so interrogating the word hate and my use of it was already very much on my mind. The manifesto explains why I make absurdist art pieces emblazoned with the title sentiment, which is itself a litmus test. If you're okay with me saying it, I don't mean you. Let's talk. If you're bothered by it, then you have work to do. And you can start by reading the manifesto, which exists so that I don't have to do the work of enlightening every individual that may be offended by my existence or my coping mechanisms. Whenever a man on the street uses hate speech against me, I have to ask myself, is he saying that he hates me? Or is he saying that seeing me not conforming to the system he holds on to so tightly and polices so vehemently in himself makes him aware of the pain of his own conformity? Does he resent having to deny harder the existence of the space I am proving the presence of by taking it up? Should I hate him in return? Or should I show him some forgiveness for not having the tools, the language to explain to himself or me that he feels untethered and therefore intimidated by witnessing my existence? Meta rudiments, my forgiveness, my self-love, and my haiku. Gorgeous Moon, 2022.